Morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone online, all our colleagues, so distinguished guests, partners, friends of ICA from around the Americas and the world. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us as we commemorate the World Day to combat desertification and drought every June 17th since 1994. It's a privilege to gather with you today and to celebrate a resource that sustains life on Earth. Dr. Bertanla will tell you it's the most important bank account we have, but it often remains unseen, undervalued. And today we've put together a series of experts I'd like to thank my colleague Carlos Leon for doing this work. In Canada, I'm the country representative for Canada and UNCCD focal point for ICA. I find that this year's conversation today comes at a critical moment across the Americas and around the world. Agriculture communities are experiencing growing impacts from drought, from land degradation. But more than half of it's degraded in the Americas. There's biodiversity loss. There's lots of resilience challenges, soil health. So it could be a water issue, it could be a quality issue. It affects and threatens food security, water availability, our livelihoods, resilience of our ecosystems upon which mankind depends. So our soils beneath our feet. Um, there are many very strong, powerful solutions available to us, and some of that we'll get to some of those healthy soil solutions today in the webinar. They're the foundation of our resilient landscapes and I would say sustainable food systems. They store and filter our water. They support biodiversity growth. They sequester carbon. It reduces erosion, helps build organic matter, and helps our crops withstand drought and different natural hazards, extremes like hurricanes in the Caribbean. So healthy soils, they're not just a component, we talk about a lot of it through environmental sustainability, but really they're a cornerstone of human well-being, even economic resilience. And so wanted to mark this important day with you, with my team here at ICA, to remind everyone of the vision of through our Living Soils work, but also through the leadership of the UNCCD, which is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And they've long emphasized through the COPs and other ways that restoring land is one of the most effective pathways to addressing interconnected global challenges. And so we need to protect our soils. We need to restore our soils, and they're essential to achieve land degradation neutrality, our different types of resilience, sustaining our future, not just for the current agriculture generation, but over time. And so together Carlos was able to put together four leading practitioners from different backgrounds to give you different perspectives on healthy soils as a cornerstone for resilience. And you'll see they'll explore different innovative approaches, shared experiences. They'll highlight some successful actions. The idea is to demonstrate how to invest in soil health. And it's a thing, right? We need to do more of that. And so we need to build that resilience because we are facing increasing drought everywhere. Every member state in the Americas has a soil issue. Parts of countries are more prone. There are corredor seco or the prairies or in the Andes. There's a lot of environmental stress everywhere. So it's a theme that begins from the ground up, and our efforts not just to conserve soil, but to restore land, restore hope. That's one of the themes UNCCD will talk about. Um, so in SOM, the soil organic matter, is so key to growth of our crops. There are lots of very good agricultural land management practices that all contribute to stronger rural communities, healthier ecosystems, a more secure future. It's more my area. I'm more of a food security expert. So I'd like to encourage, do a bit of housekeeping. All of the participants online will do the presentations and then we'll do the Q&A right after. Write your questions in the chat, and we'll get those we'll manage them and get them to the speaker for a couple minutes, and then we'll move on to we have 4 speakers in all today. So instead of waiting for Q&A at the end, we'll just do it fresh while the speaker's online. And so I'm trying to engage actively. I want you to engage actively in today's discussions. Use the chat function, and we have an interpretation service for those in Spanish. Just use the QR code and you'll be able to access the platform. So I want you to consider how we can strengthen collaboration, that's what ICA does across sectors, across the regions of the Americas. And think about the challenges we face, but also not just challenges, but the opportunities for collective action as a hemisphere, as a group. Thank you for coming to this important event topic, and I wish the speakers and the audience an inspiring and productive webinar. And I look forward to the valuable insights that we're going to get from our speakers. And I'm hoping that we can identify many of the solutions that will emerge from the discussions today to develop an action agenda. So welcome, everyone. And I'll now invite my colleague in Costa Rica. He's a Brazilian. He's Dr. Francisco Melo. He is leading our Living Soils of the Americas initiative at ICA. And so for the next 15 minutes, we'll start with him, and then we'll move on to Senator Black in Canada. Over to you, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Jean-Charles, for this kind invitation and for organizing so important event. Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
All right. So I'll give it I'll try to give a short perspective on how ICA is also pushing countries or helping countries to improve soil health. So I'm going to bring some background why soils matter, some context on soil degradation, how we're building resilience across the region, and some final takeaways. I just don't want to bring everyone to school back again, but I just want to recall how important is the miracle of photosynthesis that allow the plants getting energy from an external source, producing different kind of components that at the very end we consume and we call food, right? In this very rich environment where we live, we do have all the macronutrients, the micronutrients, but all of them together are part of our own ecosystem that allow us to keep this living system continuously. I want to recall just the importance of the macro, like specifically carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And I think that when we are getting our food, we are getting energy from carbohydrates or protein sources. All of them has carbon, hydrogen, or either oxygen. So carbon has a very known cycle, right? It is in the terrestrial surface, into the soils, you can find in the atmosphere, you can find into the oceans. So as this molecule is so important in part our food, that became one of the most important indicators in terms of sustainability and also important for food production. I'm bringing you this graph, it's very known, but because I want to emphasize that in the terrestrial environment, soils are the place where the carbon is stored. And any kind of intervention into this system will release this carbon to the atmosphere. But on the other hand, if we can also trap this carbon through this photosynthesis process and put back into the soil. And this will increase or raise our bank account, our carbon storage that will lead us more food into the future. So any kind of disturbance or interference into the system, it will promote soil degradation. So if we account worldwide, let's say, it seems that around 75% of the land present any level of degradation. That means that they're not pristine ones, right? But if you translate this to the agriculture sector, specifically to the American region or to the Americas, we're seeing somewhere around 35 to 40% of land degradation. In relation with the land use that we have here, it's around 1.2 billion hectares, with majority 80 plus, 90 plus percent occupied by pasture land and also cropland. We still have a very relevant area dedicated to fruits, to coffee, and even to reforestation, which is a very important segment also for the Canadian economy, which occupies around like 100 million hectares. So this 34, 35 to 40% of land degradation in the agriculture sector in our region represents somewhere around 350 to 400 million hectares. And of course, if we would need to promote any kind of intervention, we should consider those that will result in a very fast benefit to our societies. Comparing both kind of systems, like degraded versus productive ones, it's very easy to see, right? When we're talking about degraded soils, we're considering those that somehow promoted some deterioration under their physical, chemical, or biological properties that are compromising the way to produce food. So in the top of the screen, you can see very degraded land. You have no water infiltration, actually have like a very relevant erosion process going on. And at the down of the screen, you can see how productive land can definitely bring prosperity to farmers and actually to our societies by producing food, right? Farmers across our region for decades know really well how to produce under best practices. In the south or even in the north, they're producing under no-tillage practices, which minimizes soil disturbance. They're promoting mulching or integrating livestock into their systems, promoting some kind of circularity when you have cropland and livestock, or livestock and forestry, for example, promoting soil fertility or taking care of water management. All those practices has been very well implemented in past decades in all the Americas. But right now, we put it in a more beautiful package, and we're calling them regenerative agriculture, which I think it's a very appropriate term, because we're regenerating everything in our system with the microbial community, with putting some add-ons into the systems and returning to more food. And now I just want to take advantage and the opportunity having Professor Rattenlau here with us and remind everyone on a paper he published a little bit more than 20 years ago. This was like a breakthrough research, and I think it was the first paper I ever saw linking the carbon content to the soil to more food getting out from the farms. So Professor Lau 20 years ago said into Science that improving no-tillage cover crops, improving grazing would lead to 1 ton more of carbon pull into the soil, would lead actually to 20 to 40 kilograms per hectare of wheat, or 10 to 20 to maize. So that's very relevant. It means that if we add much more carbon to our soils, we're getting much more food from our systems. The initiative Living Soils of the Americas, which was a partnership between AICA and the Low Carbon Center from Ohio State University, among other partners, as well the University of São Paulo, the Luiz de Queiroz College for Agriculture, tried to build some specific indicators to understand what were like the best practices that we had enough evidences across the region, and understand what a massive adoption or shift from conservative tillage, for example, to no tillage, or degraded land to best practice cultivated land would lead into carbon increases content. So after 2 or 3 years of very intense studies, we were able to evaluate thousands of papers, and we were able to identify 3 major land uses conversions or practices that could be adopted. The first one, recovering, of course, all the degraded pasture, transforming into productive ones. The second picture is a reference about no tillage, right? So transitioning from cultivated soil to no tillage. And the third one, integrating definitely livestock with reforestation, or even with cropland, as we have in the southern of the region, and also in the Andean region, specifically in Colombia. So crop, livestock, and forestry. What we were able to see after checking so many papers is that in each sub-region where it is placed here across the Americas, we can see positive benefits of those shifts, of those transitions. Everywhere where we are producing under those practices, we're adding carbon into our systems. So what happens if we recover this 35, 40%, this 330, 350 million hectares under those practices, we would promote a huge mitigation of more than 13 petagrams of CO2 equivalent. If you convert this into soil carbon, that would mean around 4 billion tons. And multiplying by those factors found by Professor Lau many years ago, that correspond easily to millions of tons of food being produced. So how agriculture sector fits into, let's say, the global agenda? This is a matrix proposed by the IPCC in their report on land degradation from 2021. And they have this positive or negative aspect, being large, moderate, or small for each one of those components, like mitigation, adaptation, desertification, or land degradation, food security. And in all of them, what we found in this paper is that we are in the top of the agenda. So agriculture is key, not only to keep ourselves living, but in every term that we think about sustainability across our planet, agriculture is part of the agenda. So, of course, being linked with so important and renowned scientists, and being also a scientist in my past life, we kept asking questions and refining information, which led to this concept note that we presented to the ministers of agriculture last year called Call to Action to Promote Soil Restoration in the Americas as a basis for a more productive and resilient agriculture sector. So we began with the same basis. Let's recover these 300 million hectares and their specific land practices, those that we found in the previous research. But we added some questions, right? What is the cost of this land restoration, and how much food we would get from it? And what is the financial return over the years? And just going quite quickly here, we're seeing that that cost would be from 350 or to $430 billion. That, of course, will not happen at once. You can promote a transition, let's say, in 10 years, that would require $40 billion per year to promote this transitioning. And definitely that would lead to much more food production, like millions of animals, 1 billion tons of grains, almost 100 million of cubic meters in wood production, timber production. And over 10 years, that would lead us to a gross profit exceeding like $500 billion. And once you recover your land, it will keep continuing producing appropriately for other 10, 20 years or more, depending, of course, how you're managing your soils. So that would lead us another almost like $1 trillion in another 10 years. So that means $2 trillion, basically 1.5 to 2 in 20 years. It's very positive for the agriculture. When I was getting this data, or if we're doing this, preparing this concept note, McKinsey released a document or paper also talking about this revitalization and increasing soil health in the corn belt and the corn belt of the USA. And what they found, it's very interesting. There's this graph, right, where they're showing percentage of implementation of one or many of the technologies available. So each dot presented in the screen represents one technology, like traditional ones as cover crops, no tillage, more advanced ones like nitrogen stabilizer, what they're calling the next frontier, for example, biological products, putting trees into the system, using renewables, among others. But the paper focused only on reduced or no tillage and planting cover crops. And you can see there's still a huge gap in the corn belt in the United States with adoption of those practices. Of course, we understand that no tillage cannot be applied everywhere because specifically in the northern, such as Canada or USA, you still have a huge portion of lands covered by ice. There's somewhere in time, so you needed to remove that specific layer before crop again. But just two very known technologies being practiced in the region for decades or so still has plenty of opportunity in being implemented. And what happened when you apply just these two across the corn belt in those specific areas? That will lead not only to better environmental indicators, but also a very relevant or significant amount of resources also to all farmers, estimated here somewhere from 20 to $80 billion, right? I just presented to you that for the whole Americas, The paper we produced showed somewhere from 1.5 to $2 trillion in 20 years. But if we get the same time frame, 10 years, same region, the results we found were quite similar, somewhere from 60 to $70 billion. I have just two more slides. Everything that we have been building together with the High State University, University of São Paulo, and I need to mention Professor Carlos Eduardo Seri, the leader of the Sea Carbon there, a great researcher and a great friend of AICA. Everything that we have been building led us to the presentation and actually to approval of a resolution from our ministers in the last conference held in Brazil last November. And the call to action to promote soil restoration of the Americas as a basis to lead to more productive and resilient systems is right now part of everyone's agenda and part of AICA agenda. I have just like three very quick takeaways. One that I'm really glad actually that Professor Rattanlau and other colleagues joined us in previous years to lead to this result. I think we are building very relevant basis so governments can take a chance to adopt those indicators as basis of their new public policies. Recovering soils is key to strengthen our food security. More carbon to our system leads to more food. And I think the next challenge that we have, AICA is helping many countries to do that, and countries are actually putting their confidence also in AICA to help them to improve our food systems. We have like many cases in countries donating fertilizers to farmers or incentivizing the best agricultural practices, pretty much here in Central America. But for sure, we need and we must comes from an evidence basis and promote impact across the region. And I think we can do it together. And I'm seeing like in a very positive way the future to our region towards a more resilient and productive agriculture system. I'll end right over here. JC, thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mello. Excellent presentation, great overview of the broader topic across the continent. You might want to add the Living Soils website in the chat. There are no questions in the chat. I'd like to remind the participants that you can ask Dr. Mello any questions in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. I know, Carlos Pomerada, you have your hand raised. We won't take questions orally, verbally. You'll have to ask your question in the chat, please. I'd like to then pass it over to the Honorable Robert Black, Senator in Canada. And so we're moving from Costa Rica to Canada to look at really a game changer here on the recent soil study. Over to you, Senator.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for the introduction. It is a privilege to be here and speak to such an esteemed group from Canada. Bon matin à tous et à toutes. Bienvenido. I'm a Canadian senator representing the province of Ontario. I was appointed to the Senate of Canada by the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who asked me to use my background in agriculture, rural community development, and youth development to represent Ontarians and Canadians in the Senate chamber. And since my appointment, I continue to be an advocate in all things agriculture in the chamber of sober second thought. I'm one of three senators in the Senate chamber who have an ag background. I'm accompanied by Senator Todd Lewis, a grain farmer from Saskatchewan who was appointed in February of 2025, as well as Senator Mary Robinson, who is in the agribusiness and potato farming industry in Prince Edward Island, who was appointed in January of 2024. Folks, I take pride in rising in the Senate chamber to speak to issues impacting agriculture and rural communities across Canada. Additionally, I'm proud to have been a previous chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Agriculture and Forestry, which we refer to as AGFO. Today, I want to share information related to a study that was completed by AGFO in June of 2024, as well as a few other initiatives that have been prompted by the report. In 2022, our committee embarked on a study on the current state of soil health in Canada, something that had not been done since 1984 by the Senate of Canada. For those who know the report from '84, it's called Soil at Risk, and it certainly required some updating to better inform all levels of government, the industry, and stakeholders, as well as Canadians on the current state of soil health in Canada. Our Senate study took 18 months to complete, during which time we heard from 153 witnesses, including scientists, researchers, farmers, ranchers, industry stakeholders, and individual Canadians. We also received and reviewed 74 briefs, visited numerous farms and research facilities here in Ontario and across Canada. We also participated in the Global Soil Partnership Plenary Assembly hosted by FAO, United Nations in Rome in the summer of 2023. We used the wealth of knowledge received during the study and tabled our report entitled Critical Ground, Why Soil is Essential to Canada's Economic, Environmental, Human and Social Health on June 6, 2024. You can access that report electronically online through the use of the QR code that's being projected. We approached the study from various angles, but our main finding was clear. Soils throughout Canada and around the world are at risk and require immediate action to protect, preserve, and conserve our world's soils. And we've already heard that from Dr. Mello earlier today. We learned about the troublesome conditions of soil health and the pervasiveness of soil degradation, a state in which soil significantly loses its ability to grow food, hold water, and promote biodiversity. In fact, the most concerning statistic that we heard came from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, which found that in 2021, 30% of the world's soils were already degraded, and they estimated that number to be as high as 90 by 2050. And today, that's only 24 years away, and we have some work to do here in Canada. The committee also learned of the prevalence of soil pollution and contamination that severely impacts soil's ability to produce food, lessens the quality and nutritiousness of the crops produced, and reduces soil's natural ability to act as a buffer against the spread of pollutants and disease. We heard from witnesses that there are 20 million contaminated sites across the world, directly impacting the environment, the world's food stability, and human health. I always take the opportunity to stand up in the Senate chamber and remind my colleagues that our farmers are resilient and innovative here in Canada, and the strength of this sector was affirmed by this study. But we need to do more to support the industry, and I continue to say that whenever I get the opportunity. The agriculture community was and continues to be aware of the challenges facing soil health here in Canada. Many witnesses spoke about regenerative farming methods, such as no and low-till farming, use of cover crops, diversification of crops, agroforestry, and grazing management techniques. By favoring regenerative and sustainable practices, these early adopters and innovators are already here in Canada mitigating climate change, promoting cleaner air and water, increasing carbon sequestration, and enhancing biodiversity, thereby improving soil health on the farms. However, we also heard that these early adopters are not being recognized here in Canada or compensated for the work and the research into best practices or their adoption of sustainable methods. This in turn reduces the incentive for other farmers, neighbors, and those that are watching to adopt these best practices. Our final report contained 25 recommendations, which you'll find in the report, for the Government of Canada to protect, preserve, and conserve soil health across this country. We did receive the government response to these recommendations in November 2024, which also can be found on the AgFo Committee website. Although time won't permit me to review all the recommendations and government responses with you, I'd like to highlight just two that I think are especially important. Our first recommendation to the federal government was to designate soil as a strategic national resource. I can't overstate the potential for soil to Canada's well-being and prosperity. For Canada, the agriculture sector can be a powerhouse, an economic powerhouse, if and only if they're provided with the necessary resources and supports they need to thrive. Canada is already a food sovereign nation, but we must use this to ensure food security for this country and the world. Not to mention the environmental benefits of healthy soils that will keep our water and ecosystems healthy and thriving. The government supported this recommendation in principle, explaining their recognition of the foundational role that soil plays in agriculture, ecosystems, and for human health. The report's final recommendation was to recognize a sense of urgency in this issue and act accordingly. We don't have another 40 years to protect and conserve soil. I use the time 40 years because it was 40 years between the first Senate soil study and the one that was tabled in 2024. One of our witnesses pointed this out during the study and made it very clear that we don't have another 40 years. The government supported this recommendation, which is absolutely wonderful news. I want to assure you that I continue to advocate for a government to prioritize protection, preservation, and conservation of soils in our country, and to have them honor their responses to the recommendations. And so with that in mind, I'm proud to announce that, inspired by the committee report, I tabled a bill in the Senate of Canada aimed at developing a national strategy for the protection, conservation, and enhancement of soil health. Bill S-230 was clear. The strategy must include recommendations to declare soil as a strategic national asset. The committee report was also clear. Soil is not only used to grow food, it has the potential to clean our waters, protect our ecosystems, and secure Canada's national and economic security, and therefore must be declared a strategic national asset. So with that in mind, I'm also happy to share that earlier this year, it passed the Senate chamber unanimously on March the 26th. But at the same time, that same day, I'll back up, it passed the Senate chamber and then it's moved on to the House of Commons for their concurrence, their movement forward with the bill and to concur with the bill. That will take some time. But the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada announced on March 26th, the same day it passed in our chamber, the launch of the development of a strategy before the legislation even passed their chamber, which meant that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is now collaborating with Soil Conservation Council of Canada to develop a first national agricultural soil strategy based on Bill S-230. The federal government has signaled their support of this initiative, and I believe this is incredible news for the protection of Canada's soils, for the agriculture and agri-food industry, and for all Canadians. Soil erosion and soil degradation continues to significantly affect the world's grasslands, farmlands, and our world soils. So I'm delighted that Minister MacDonald is emphasizing this government's commitment to safeguarding our soils through the launch of the development of a strategy, national soil strategy. I am confident that with continued discussions around the soil report and collaboration between like-minded individuals and organizations like you folks that are participating in this seminar, we can protect our soils worldwide, supporting cleaner water and healthier environment, as well as to ensure food security for all our nations. I do look forward to continuing to advocate for soil health throughout Canada, and I am excited to see the development and rollout of Canada's National Agriculture Soil Strategy in the coming months. Thanks again for the opportunity to join you today. I do appreciate it. Merci, miigwech.
Merci à vous. That was great, Senator. Always a pleasure to have you. I'd like to invite the audience to ask the Senator any questions in the chat and pass it over to Dr. Ratan Lal, Distinguished University Professor at Ohio State, also a Goodwill Ambassador at ICA. Over to you, Dr. Lal.
Thank you. I'm going to share the slides. Can you see anything yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to put them on the view. All right. You see the full screen.
Correct.
Thank you. I do want to thank IRCA Canada for inviting me. I do want to acknowledge that I feel greatly privileged and honored to be affiliated with ICA, which has done tremendous work in creating awareness and organizing program on living soil, as Dr. Mello had mentioned. So I would like to give a little bit background on statistics on what has happened in the LAC region. Since 1960, it transformed from a subsistence farming into a powerhouse of global food supply. It is, however, heavily dependent on intensive resource use. I'll come back to that in a moment. The regional attributes, of course, of Latin America, the southern cone, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, are into global center for grain production, and the Andean and Central American region for tropical cash crops such as coffee and banana. The temporal changes in arable land since 60s, from 89 million hectare to 151 million hectare. That's a FAO statistic. And this process we can divide into 3 stages: from 60s to 80s, land expansion and the green revolution, conversion of previously unfarmable soil into highly productive agroecosystem, such as the Cerrados in Brazil, 90s to 2000 productivity boom, a massive increase in total productivity with heavy output, and then from 2010 to present, somewhat stagnation and input dependency. The total factor productivity growth rate declined with intensive use of inputs, especially those of chemicals. So that is bring us to the regions of the LAC from terms of agroecological perspective. There's a carbon sequestration zone that Dr. Mello mentioned, a tremendous potential of mitigating probably 12 to 50% of region's greenhouse gas emissions by soil carbon sequestration. Then there's the equatorial zone, which is oxysoils of the Amazon, a low to medium soil health index because of environmental fragility. And there's the degradation zone. Soils of the arid and savanna biomes are prone to degradation processes, primarily due to deforestation, exposed soil surface, and sandy coarse texture. Crop yield changes have been very impressive. The average corn yield has gone up by a factor of 4 over the period from 60 to present. Soybean yield about 3 times, and the wheat yield also almost 3 times. So that's a very impressive agricultural productivity gain. The total agriculture production in million tons was only about 430 in 1961, and it is 2 billion ton at present. So that's the global success story, which of course ICA has played an important role as a catalytic agent in promoting soil health and its management. This productivity also has come from increase in fertilizer use. The total fertilizer use was only 8 kilogram per hectare in 1960s, and it's 145 kilogram per hectare at present. So NPK, all of these along with lime, calcium, magnesium, especially for the cerrado and acidic soil. The land area equipped for irrigation has gone up from 8 million to about 30 million, went up by a factor of 4. So that's what we mean by input dependency. Therefore, while the great success story at a global scale, there are emerging issues. And that is balance global export demand and domestic food security and environmental conservation. That's a very delicate balance that needs to be done. We must also have focus on nature-based green farming rather than heavy dependence on chemicals, herbicide, pesticide, fertilizer. Some of the major challenges are environmental degradation, including climate change, threats to natural capital, soil health, and freshwater resources, and the CO2 emission equivalent were only 1.1 gigaton in 1970 and is 3.3, gone by a factor of 3 in 2024. So the LAC region has a agricultural part, also significant contribution to greenhouse gas emission. But yet, because of that all success, despite all that success, 38% or 40% of soils are degraded, 34% are comparatively in good health, and the status of soil degradation actually varies. Unhealthy soil, as I already mentioned, 38%, moderately healthy are 28%, and healthy soils are about 1/3 of the total. So soil degradation is an issue that Latin America and ICA should really consider how to plan and manage the soil so the degradation problem can be minimized and soil restoration becomes a priority. Because only when soil health is optimal that it can support life and transform dead organisms into a new life. Life supporting process depends on soil health. All terrestrial life depends on soil health. What are the causes of soil degradation and environmental degradation? Unsustainable agriculture. Excessive tillage, although South America has done a major contribution to improving adoption of conservation tillage, but still there are regions where it is excessive. Inefficient irrigation, flood and sprinkler are not as good as drip. Inappropriate nutrient management, fertilizer, as I said, 150 kilogram per hectare. Use efficiency, especially of nitrogen, is very low. Pollution word was mentioned by Honorable Senator. Plastic pollution, in addition to the contamination by agrochemicals, microplastic. Urbanization is aggravating that problem. So is mining and anthropogenic climate change, of course. High rate of carbon decomposition because of the high temperature, accelerated erosion in certain regions on sloping lands, and of course, low water holding capacity, which aggravate the soil degradation issues. Therefore, ecological restoration is a priority. Soil is a strategic global asset that must be protected, restored, and sustainably managed through community-based solutions. I think that's a priority that we must all consider. Critical ecosystem services, which was one of the things that I was supposed to talk about. Soil attributes are important to them: physical, chemical, biological. Those three are commonly talked. Ecological is also a factor which we should not ignore. Soil ecological attributes. Ecosystem services provided by these, they support agriculture productivity, moderate water and nutrient cycle, sequester carbon, resist erosion, promote biodiversity. Of course, these are achieved through also other parts which determine soil health. Therefore, the need at present is reconciling food and nutrition security with adaptation and mitigation of anthropogenic climate change and the cultural services. So that transformation must happen, especially in the Latin American region. The key ecosystem services which can be undermined if soil health is not taken care of is food security issue, which is now a global supply source for food. Of course, the climate change adaptation mitigation depends on soil. The soil and water conservation, renewability and quality, pure water supply depends on soil health. Of course, biodiversity, all these depends on health soil. And therefore, if this is to be considered as a pyramid, and the stability of this pyramid depends, of course, on the political stability and peace and the policies that protect, restore, and manage soil health. Policies which are pro-nature, pro-agriculture, and pro-farmer. And from that point of view, protection, restoration, sustainable management of soil health, of agroecosystem, there are several options. Regenerative agriculture and agroecology has been quite prominent in the last 5 to 10 years. Conservation agriculture, drip fertigation, complex rotations, and then, of course, prudent governance. I already mentioned soil protection policy, which does not exist in many places. We have a Clean Air Act in the US, EPA, we have Clean Water Act, but no Healthy Soil Act. I think the same thing applies everywhere else, including South America. And how to improve favorable infrastructure so that agricultural supply chain is continuously sustained. Soil mapping of the Soil Health Index is a good starting point. Map soil health on regular basis, like at least once every 5 years. Data sharing amongst countries, amongst institutions, remote sensing. Monitoring soil health by routine method is very expensive, time-consuming, and laborious. Remote sensing option should be adopted and promoted and research upon. And of course, the data process with AI, cloud-based machine learning, and other processes emerging is a very important option that we must consider with the goal of produce more from less. So excessive fertilizer, excessive chemical, excessive plowing, they should replace judicious use of resources. Therefore, our slogan should be producing more from less. Soil health is the frontier of soil science. It's capacity of soil to function as a living ecosystem, as Dr. Mello had mentioned, to sustain plants, animal, and human, while connecting agriculture and soil science with the policy, stakeholder needs, and sustainable supply chain management. The future of climate resilience, it lies beneath our feet in soil health and its management. Soil is humanity's lifeline, and a healthy soil, the strongest defense against climate change, environmental degradation, and pollution. And that's a concept that we must promote very strongly everywhere. The resilient future necessitates proactive adaptation across ecological, technological, and social demands of the growing and increasingly affluent population of 8.2 billion present in the world and destined to be 9.7 billion in another 24 years. And that's an issue that we must consider by transitioning from degradation to regeneration. That's the focus. Our obsession with a high yield should be replaced with improving environment. And it requires a paradigm shift from extractive farming to regenerative agriculture, for restoring soil organic matter content, for enhancing soil biodiversity, for improving soil structure, for increasing green water supply in the root zone, for strengthening coupled cycling. Coupled. The cycles of water and carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and other are not by themselves. They are collected together. Water, carbon, nitrogen, they go together. And that decoupling by misuse of soil and land mismanagement has created many problems. Therefore, restoring degraded land becomes a very critical issue. Weight of living organism in healthy soil, that's why soils are called living thing. Total biomass about 15 megagram per hectare. Bacteria is 13, fungi 2, arthropods about 1, protozoa about 0.1. And these things that make the soil a living entity. And their life support depends on the management of the soil that is not disturbed, continuous ground cover, mulching, cover cropping, all those things we call about soil as a living, whose indicators are similar to those of organism, which also breathe. The respiration quotient, of course, soil must be fed through regular input of biomass, and soil productivity which means ecosystem services depend on soil health and sustainable management. And decline in soil health should really be considered a serious issue globally, but including in Latin America. That brings to the question of very honorable Dr. Black may have something to say about it. Does soil have a right? Yes. Like any other living organism, soil must also have rights to be protected, restored, and managed properly so that it can thrive and flourish. Simply because you own it doesn't mean you can do with it what you wish. It must be protected and restored, managed properly, for which we need a Soil Health Act, similar to the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. In the US, we need Soil Health Act, not only in the US, but also everywhere else in the Americas and the world. Farming carbon is a new thing. It means crop, like we grow wheat and corn, so it can bring income for farmers. And regenerative agriculture is really, excuse me, is really the issue which we must pay attention. And regenerative agriculture is not one option. It is many options which are inspired by eco-innovation, powered by non-carbon energy, driven by circular economy and green infrastructure, and supported by the recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere as the bedrock of sustainable development. The Arabic word elixir, anglicized, is that soil health is the elixir recipe of life. AI can play a very important role, and I think we should use as much option of AI as possible for restoration of soil health and protection of natural resources. Environment management requires climate literacy, and that means in public colleges and school, all the way beginning from the kindergarten, perhaps our education curricula. And I'm very glad that ICA put out a book agreement, which is a very example that alphabet could be very environment and soil oriented. So the curricula regular updating is very, very essential. So are the policies that need to be improved and updated. Policy that reward farmer for better agriculture and not necessarily reward farmer for best yield for better agriculture. And license, that's ICA's project, which I must compliment them. Living Soils of America, promoting the concept that soil is a living entity. The heart of soil health is the soil organic matter content, and management of the organic matter content is the key to healthy soil. Private sector can definitely play a role in promoting nature positive agriculture, increasing access to inputs, improving investment in agriculture research and development. And the mission overall is, of course, to feed the world by producing more from less. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. Always a pleasure to hear from you. And I miss out, if we had more time, you could tell us some stories from India and how you grew up. It's a great overview for the audience who are less familiar with the value of soil health and ecosystem services. Appreciate that. The audience is most welcome to write to Dr. Lau in the chat, please. And I'd like to then pass it over to our final speakers for today, Miss Andrea Metza. She's the Deputy Executive Secretary for the UNCCD. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon. It's really my pleasure to be here, and I would like then to try to do an important wrap-up of some of the things that our previous speakers have mentioned. I think that it's clearly a need to try to develop the right policy and legal frameworks and the right enabling environment to scale up all this process of restoring our soils and guarantee this good management and protection of the soil health. And for this, I really want to connect the dots with the international legislative process. And first, to really recognize ICA for celebrating this International Day of Desertification, Land Degradation, and Drought as part of one of these aspects of one of the three Rio Conventions, which is UNCCD, and the opportunity that we have to use this process to accelerate what is happening at the national level. As you know, as a multilateral international treaty, this process achieved a very important COP decision in Riyadh, which was to restore these agricultural lands. And in this COP decision, it is inviting the different countries to generate the right policy frameworks to start working on soil health. So among other things, this important COP decision also make reference to water issues, to the connection with the biodiversity framework, and nutrition and other matters. But what I want to bring to your attention is the opportunity to start using this COP decision that has the same level as a COP decision in the climate space or in the biodiversity space, and to really accelerate the process at the national level. Dr. Lal was really mentioning we need these soil health acts, and it is already there in the international atmosphere, a request to the countries to start putting in place these right policy frameworks. But also then knowing that the next COP, UNCCD COP, will be happening in Mongolia the last 2 weeks of August. And during the second week, we will have the high-level segment with ministerial dialogues. And the incoming presidency, the government of Mongolia, is really giving priority as well to this issue. And with the support of several partners, now we will have not only finance days to discuss how can we mobilize more resources for this agenda, for the scaling up actions and investments to manage, protect, and restore land and soil, but also enhance drought resilience, which are the two pillars of the convention. On Monday, Finance Day. On Tuesday, 25th of August, we will have Water Day, the Land Water Nexus. On Wednesday, Land and People's Days with rangelands and pastoralists for Mongolia, a very important issue, and it's the International Years of Rangelands and Pastoralists. And on Thursday, it's Food Systems and Soil Health Day. So for the first time in these multilateral processes, we are having a day where there will be a thematic day on the action agenda to facilitate the enhancement, the engagement of non-state actors, connect the movement, and continue seeing, hopefully, more activities happening on the ground. But the beauty of this is not only that we have this thematic day as part of the action agenda, but that there will be as well a Business for Land forum, where one of the issues is how can we generate the good conditions to facilitate this engagement of the private sector. We're hearing fantastic things of some companies that they're adopting these sustainable land management and soil management practices through their value chains. But we need more of these companies, and we need to scale up more of these efforts. And for this, we need the right policy frameworks. And I'm going to connect this idea again. And this is what the COPs are for. If we have these COP decisions, then we can continue working with the governments at the national level to put in place these right policies, these right incentives to scale up these efforts. So it's an invitation as well. And hopefully all of you that are here connected and hearing to come to Mongolia the last 2 weeks of August, or particularly the last week of August, because we will be not only connecting with policymakers, ministers from agriculture, from environment, from finance, but also with leaders of companies, CEOs, with farmers, with subnational governments, and even with parliamentarians. And this is generating the right environment to scale up all these efforts. I think that the science is clear. We will not achieve climate and biodiversity goals if we don't have healthy land and healthy soils. We will not achieve and have food and water security if we don't have our healthy soils, our healthy land. So it's really a building block for prosperity. And to achieve these aspects of start working in a more integrated manner, and this is the other, I will say, important message here, more integration to accelerate impact and to guarantee impact. And this is what we have mandates for as well in UNCCD, to continue integrated what we're doing in climate and biodiversity. We have strong mandates as well on synergies. So it's an invitation. Use this process. This is your process, and hope that we can, as a global movement, continue working in this. I want to also mention that with Rotan, with Dr. Lau, we are co-facilitating the Global Future Council within the World Economic Forum as a way also to try to continue bridging the process with the private sector. We are cleared, and we're hoping to generate a document that will bring some very interesting cases on how we can engage more the private sector and why this makes economic sense. So hope to see you all in Mongolia, and hope we can continue seeing these processes at the national level with the right policy, legal frameworks, and incentives. Over.
That was great, Andrea. Thanks for joining us from Germany. Really appreciate it. It's late for you, and I know you're busy today. It's your day for all of you in CCD globally, even from Nairobi. I would like to invite Gabrielle, your colleague, to post in the chat a link to the COP17. ICA plans to be there at the COP as well as the UNCCD focal point. It'll be good to catch up with you in person there. And I'm delighted to announce that for those who don't know, UNCCD and ICA signed a MOU virtually on May 5th. So a partnership to address the many issues that Anja just raised, and a great summary. And I have a question from the audience. It would be for Dr. Lal in this case. If you can share your presentation. If we're allowed, then I would suggest you send it to ICA, and then ICA will take care of distributing it to the different audience members who requested it.
Yes, you can distribute, please, as you wish.
And thank you, Dr. Lau. I have another Carlos Pomerella for Andrea. Policies are focused in the short run, and therefore subsidies to fertilizer are only one policy. The other non-policy is allowing strong investment of fertilizer companies in publicity. Well, it's not really a question, I guess. You're happy to comment if you wish. We have all the speakers here. From our end, we're delighted to be a bridge builder convener in the Americas. We have access to all the 34 ministers and secretaries of agriculture in our 34 member states, from Canada to Argentina. We have a continental living soils initiative, and we address many of the issues that Angia raised with our member states. Many of them are more advanced, and happily, Canada is also, as you can tell from Senator Black, progressing on a national soil health study, and that the study's done actually. It's more implementing now by the Department of Agriculture. So I'm excited to hear about the global interest in soils. It's renewed interest. That's a shift. You can see I called it a game changer earlier. Maybe I can ask Carlos to put all the speakers instead of just Andrea. That way we can have a chance to see everyone on the same screen. Thanks, Carlos. And I can happily invite any of the speakers to ask a question to each other. Was there anything that you'd like to ask Angie or the senator or our colleague Dr. Mello in Costa Rica? Over to you, speakers, and we have about, I would say, 9 minutes left. Andrea, please.
Thank you. And maybe to the senator, because and I missed part of the intervention, but it would be very interesting to hear, right? What has been the biggest challenges to put in place this this policy, this strategy, and what will be then your advice to other countries?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. You can hear
Yes.
me? Yes.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I will admit that the strategy is being developed now. So we're not through to the tactics and undertaking them, but I think we're making great strides just having the government acknowledge, one, that there's a need to do a national soil health strategy, and two, that they've moved ahead without actually having to be, quote unquote, forced to do it through a bill or through an act of Parliament. That act is still moving forward in their chamber, and it someday will pass, I hope, in the coming months. But the Minister of Agriculture said it was time to do it now. So, in my mind, that's an exciting move forward, and I believe an acknowledgement by this government and Canadians that the time is right. And they're not. The other thing is they're working with industry. In this case, collaborating with the Soil Conservation Council of Canada and many others. But it's an exciting time, and I don't intend to let them rest on their laurels. We need to drive it on once we have a strategy. Thanks very much.
And you'll be glad to know, Andrea, that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has reached out to ICA to support them in a side event at COP17 on this issue.
Great news. This is great news. We really need to learn from the experiences of other countries, right? And understand what makes a minister take the decision, what are the elements that parliamentarians need to hear, right? To see the importance of start creating this kind of policies and legal frameworks, and as well yes, the different context is very important, and what are some of the key aspects, right, to consider. Of course, the background information, the science we know is there. I know that there has been robust data already developed, and we still need to continue investing, of course, in science and in information, but then as well to understand what is the game changer in some of these cases. And thank you for sharing, an honorable parliamentarian there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Senator, then I have a question in the chat.
Yes, I just wanted to add that I think it's the work, some of what we have used in the last few years is the work of the United Nations, right? And that statistic that came out in 2021 that actually put our committee, in a different state, that said that 30% of our world soils are degraded already, some of which are in Canada, and that 90% could be degraded by 2050. That's hopefully in my lifetime, right? So it's a scary situation. And whenever I say that to folks that I talk to, there's a bit of right? It's not 100 years down the road or 200 or 1,000. It's today. And so thank you to the United Nations for the work they're doing.
Here. Dr. Lau.
Well, thank you so much. I want to ask Andrea, perhaps, so that when parliamentarians are there and policymakers, how do we encourage, promote, ask policymakers to change subsidies to payment for ecosystem services? I think that's going to be very touchy and critical policy question. We know how difficult that can be, but subsidies have created a lot of environmental problems.
That was one of
Mismanagement of nitrogen and so forth. So how do we change those to payment for carbon sequestration, for water conservation, for soil erosion control, and so forth?
Thank you, Ratan. But I saw, Senator, I think you wanted to do a comment, and then I can as well elaborate.
Senator, did you want to add a point before Andrea answers? I think he's frozen. Please go ahead, Andrea.
Is he Is he there, Senator? No.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay.
You wanted to comment on Ratan's question?
I was just going to say that that was one of our recommendations, is that that there needs to be a change in the way of supporting individuals who are undertaking activities with respect to soil health. And that was one of our recommendations that was accepted in principle by the government. So I guess we're hopefully moving down that road. It was noted that the folks that have been doing this work for 20, 30 years are not being recognized, especially if we put a baseline of 2025 or 2021. All the good work that's happened in the past won't have been acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Dr. Lau, I think that is one of the most difficult questions, right, for a policymaker. Clearly, the current incentives that we have are not giving the right signals to the farmers and to the different decision makers. And one of the big aspects is this issue of repurposing. Sometimes to the governments, it's not even asking for new public resources, right? It's sometimes to align this to the good policies. But this is why it's so important to have in place a goal. We need to restore this amount of soil, of hectares. It is then as well the importance of having then some of these acts, these legal frameworks in place. So the policies with the vision, the legal frameworks requesting certain activities. And then as well, this triggers sometimes this conversation on repurposing some of these subsidies that in many cases are harmful subsidies for this transition. And we know it's a difficult one, but this is why it's so important to continue generating the economic case, right? Understanding all the ecosystem services and giving value to the ecosystem services that these healthy soils provide to society. Clearly on carbon sequestration, on water security, on food security, on biodiversity. I mean, it's huge, but we have not, as society, we have not recognized these services. We have not given the economic value to this. So it's a process, and I hope we can leapfrog, do this leapfrogging on these processes, because I think that the science is clear. Of course, when you are a decision maker, and I'm sure the senator can give testimony of this, one of the hardest conversations is always about subsidies and changing subsidies, but it is possible. And we have seen some stories, and I think that then this is when we require this bold leadership, that it is clear on generating this prosperity and with quality of life, right? As a center element, this well-being approach. And I think that when we have leaders that are pursuing that for their societies, then some of these hard decisions can happen, as we have seen before in other areas in the environment, in the development. And I'm sure that for this as well, the possibility, and this is why it's so important to bring together these parliamentarians and these other decision makers so they can exchange about their priorities, their arguments, and hopefully we can see more of this good policy and legal frameworks in place very soon.
Agreed. We have one last question in the chat, and maybe we can close after that. A colleague of ours in Costa Rica, Beverly Bess, asks, what advances are needed in monitoring, reporting, and verification to ensure confidence in soil carbon measurements? Maybe we can start with Dr. Lau.
Well, we have quite a few new innovation coming up in soil carbon assessment and measurement. But as far as for example, rather than taking soil sample, preparing it, bringing to the lab, and analyzing just after bringing to the lab, really more than $25 per sample. So it's a very expensive process. So doing something remote sensing, I had mentioned, finding devices like handheld things. We have been trying that to point to the soil and gives you approximate plus minus 5% value, which is good enough to start. So those innovations are certainly happening. But the question really is, do we need to have detailed measurement of soil carbon stock for every acre? The answer to that is no. Very good example was the set-aside land, the so-called soil health act. It was not soil health, soil set-aside act of 1987 Farm Bill in the U.S., where highly erodible land were taken out of production and farmers are paid what they would have received if they were growing corn or soybean. So the payment was not made on whether the erosion was happening or not. Payments are made on satellite imagery if the farmers were actually not cultivating the land. So something of that nature, if farmers are adopting no-till cover cropping, we know approximately for each region the rate and therefore pay. Do not bring up the question of detailed monitoring. Some monitoring, occasional ground truthing is necessary, but not detail that people think are required. No, we do not need that.
Wanted to add, unless Fujita or my colleague Dr. Mello wants, sir, go ahead, and then I'll add an additional point myself. Please.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm just going to jump in here and make a couple of comments. I completely agree on what Professor Rectangle said, but I would also add that it depends on the purpose on what we are doing, right? So if you're doing like a monitoring at scale and seeing how land is transitioning here, for example, in Americas or an entire planet, of course, you need like faster technologies to give you the numbers. And of course, you will have like uncertainties associated to this. So the higher uncertainty level, the higher level of depth of information you're providing to people. But the problem, in my opinion, is when you try to bring all those technologies and put into ways to monitor, report, and sell this into the markets. Because sometimes you can have, for example, 1 ton of carbon to your in your soil, plus or less another one. So what you're selling, what you're trading, right, into those markets. But when you're doing or using those technologies to just monitor what's going on the land surface, and if that's pointing to some kind of policies, as we do have, for example, in Brazil, I think it works really, really well. I want just to go back to the previous discussion. I didn't want to disturb here, but I also completely agree on what Andrea said, and I think she knows quite well a very interesting case that Brazil has, which is the low carbon agriculture program, in which the government set up, let's say, a perfect package on multilateral, or multi-actor goals as a way to reduce or to mitigate greenhouse gases. And to the agriculture sector, it was the goal to mitigate from 130 millions to 160 millions in the first 10 years, and then 100 billion tons of CO2. But the point is, people who are doing this transformation are the farmers. You need them, and you need to reach them out to make these shifts, this transformation. So the government led them to take loans, well, let's say very long-term loans, 8-10 years or more, depending on the components that they were adding to their systems, with low interest rates. But after 10-15 years or so, we were able to see like a huge increase, like say millions of hectares of land cultivated right now under crop, livestock, and forestry systems, for example. So for the farmer's perspective, it's also like a shift, because he's just, let's say that he's having his pasture land and a cattle, but then he needs to add a different component he's not used to, like forest component. So it takes time, and he needs that time in order to rethink about his whole system, and in order also to recover the investment he's doing as a way to pay the loan. So thinking let's say ideal package, I would add all these components. A government has a specific goal, and it will assist or help farmers also to adopt that specific technology that will lead to this transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mello. The point I wanted to add, many people ask if carbon credits work. They have doubts. They're not sure. It can be expensive. Some they're less familiar with how it works. We have a success story, at least, that there are lots of them around, but the one I wanted to give is when we were in Baku at the COP, the climate change COP, and we had bought over $100,000 worth of carbon credits to be carbon neutral as ICA, as in our participation in the COP. So we worked and partnered with Carbon Asset Solutions in Australia to support a northern Alberta grains farmer, and he used these credits to improve carbon soil sequestration by 12% across, several thousand acres. And that's additional revenue too. So it works. That's just a small example. But for those who are unsure about how they work, there are lots of venues and tools out there in the world to support the farming sector and ranchers too in this space. And I think Gisela had one question. I don't see it in the chat. She raised her hand, but she didn't follow up. So any last comments? I'm happy to give the speakers one last closing remarks, and then I'm happy to end the webinar.
I'll just start by saying thanks very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it, and wishing everybody well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Senator. Maybe Anja, the final word to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to ICA for organizing this timely and important event that contributes as well on the importance of addressing land degradation, desertification, and drought as a critical activity. And this, just to mention that soil health, it's part of the solution when we're talking about addressing land degradation, desertification, and drought. And as well, an invitation to continue seeing all these good examples. Francisco just talked about this one in Brazil. When the governments are there, we need to support them when they want to do some of these actions, because it's not easy to do this. And this is why this multilateral process, and the senator made the point, the UN is generating some of this data, but not only that, in many cases it's the international legislative process, use the COP decisions, but then as well, this is one of the elements we need to continue working at the national level with the ministries, with the different organizations, and of course with the farmers to support them in this transition. But looking forward to see you in the UNCCD COP17 in Mongolia as well. Thank you.
Thank you, on the contrary. Dr. Lau?
Thank you for organizing the event. I think these are the kind of creating awareness event that we really need. The policymaker, senator, people like him are very, very helpful, very supportive, but still creating awareness that the green revolution of the 60s was variety-based. And we need good varieties, no question about that. But the good varieties cannot do the performance where their potential if they're not grown in healthy soil. So the current revolution, whatever that I can't call it, has to be soil-based, has to be environmental-based, has to be ecosystem-based. It's not a productivity alone concept. I mentioned obsession with high yield at the cost of environment. So these kind of events are very, very important for creating and enhancing environment. And thank you for the opportunity to talk this morning.
Thank you, on the contrary. Wichita, you good? Dr. Mello, any last words for you, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, very, very fast. Thank you very much, Jean-Charles. I'm honored to be in this panel. There are so important colleagues here. Soil matters, and here from an ICA perspective, we're ready to keep supporting our countries to make this transition like a reality. I think this is like the key message. Thank you very much.
I agree. And so in the chat, they're asking about the webinar itself. We will publish it in about a week's time. Let's say next Tuesday. It should be online on the ICA Canada page within all the different country pages at ICA. And we'll share the link with all the participants today. But thanks for your time in celebrating our efforts to combat desertification, drought, and look forward to seeing many of you at the COP17. And I wish the UNCC much success in their celebrations today and the COP itself. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much.